We're starting off 2025 strong with information about the FIRE movement. I have had this YouTube channel for 1 year now, and I cannot believe that I have not spoken about the FIRE movement. Now, just to bring everyone up to speed, the FIRE movement has been around for some time, and it stands for Financially Independent Retire Early. It was really big over the last 5 to 7 years, but in recent times it's died down a little bit. But there are many Americans, especially younger Americans, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, that are adherents of this movement. And essentially what it means is that you work and that you save and invest, and you have a very, very high saving investment rate. You may invest 50% of everything you earn, or sometimes 75 or 90% of everything you earn, all with an eye towards retiring early. And that may be retirement in mid-30s or 40s, or even retirement in 50s for some Americans. What do I think as a financial advisor about the FIRE movement? Stay with me. So one of the core tenets of the FIRE movement states that you need 25 times your annual spending in order to be able to retire comfortably. Where does this number of 25 times your annual spending come from? It's a work through of the 4% rule. Basically, 4% rule for retirees says that you can safely withdraw 4% of your retirement account balance each and every year, and you'll never run out of money. Now, I have some caveats and some questions about that assumption, but that is a basic core assumption of the FIRE movement. There are also several forms of FIRE. There is lean FIRE, where you really scale back your lifestyle expectations and you put all of that money that you save on rent or car or a fancy lifestyle into investments. There is fat FIRE, which means you are working towards maybe a more luxurious lifestyle. So instead of 25 times your annual spending, you're looking at more 30, 35 times your annual spending because you want some luxury in retirement. There is coast FIRE, where you work in the early years of your working career to save up or invest a lot of money so that when you get further into your career, you either don't have to invest or you don't have to invest quite as much. And finally, there's something called Barista FIRE. I didn't know it was called Barista FIRE, but this is a thing. And it's basically the FIRE movement with an eye towards not retirement and leaving the workforce, but stepping back at a certain point in your life and career and taking a less demanding job with less pay and sometimes less benefits to not have the same stress associated with your current level of work. So there are many different elements within the FIRE movement, and adherents of the FIRE movement have to decide which pathway within FIRE they want to take themselves. Now, do I know people as a financial advisor and in my personal life who are adherents of FIRE? Yes, I do. There's some things that I've noticed about FIRE movement people. Do I think that the FIRE movement can work for most Americans? No. Most Americans don't have the constellation of traits that I think are necessary in order to be long-term adherents to the FIRE movement. But I do believe as a financial advisor and wealth manager, even if you can do FIRE for a short period of time, even if you can only do FIRE for 3 years, it can really be transformative for your financial life. So what are some of the constellation of traits that I've noticed about people who are in the FIRE movement? They tend to be people who are comfortable with a very long-term view. They're people who can typically take a plan and hold that plan for many years or decades to get to their goal. They tend to be laser focused, and they're very intentional what they're doing in their career and in their personal life and in their financial life that all support that goal. So the first thing I notice about people who are adherents of the FIRE movement and are successful with it is that they are very long-term view oriented, and they are willing to hold the goal for a decade or more to reach their ultimate objective of financial independence, retiring early. Next thing I've noticed, they tend to be very conscientious people. If they say they're going to do it, consider it done. If I give them paperwork, they're going to sign it and send it back. If I need them to do something, they're going to do it and they're going to get back to me with the results. I never have to wonder about them. I never have to follow up. I never have to get on their case about anything. They're naturally very conscientious people. And if they say they're going to do something, or if they say something is going to happen, I can consider it done. They typically work well-paying jobs. Now, I have encountered some people who were like teachers or public servants who were in the FIRE movement, and oftentimes their pension was part of the discussion of FIRE. But people who can't rely on a pension or pension system typically have well-paying jobs into the six-figure. Why? Living in America is very, very expensive. And sure, there are some places that are more expensive than others, but even if you're living in a moderate cost of living area in the United States, you still need a pretty good chunk of money to lead even a decent life. Rent, food, clothing, transportation, those things take up money. And FIRE is built in excess, meaning you have to have excess money left over every single month. And if you're burning it up in rent, food, clothing, and cost of living, it's really hard to be an adherent of the FIRE movement. So typically, if you have a good six-figure salary and you live a frugal lifestyle, there is excess left for you to invest at the end of the month. So there are a few cases where there are people who are working in the public service sector who are adherents of FIRE, but for the most part, all the people I know who are doing FIRE earn a good six-figure salary. Okay, these are people who typically live a modest lifestyle and are willing to continue that modest lifestyle into the future. FIRE doesn't work for people who currently live a modest lifestyle, but when they retire, they want to drive a Lamborghini and travel the world. No, it requires a commitment throughout your lifetime to maintaining a modest standard of living. And I think this caveat is where many Americans fall short, because we expect to have better in the future. We expect to drive a better car, live in a better house, live in a better neighborhood, go on better trips. We are pushed to keep moving forward and keep pushing the envelope forward. That is what our society is often built on, and one of the key tenets of capitalism. If you're going to do FIRE, you have to take a step back from that expectation that each and every year you will do better. And you have to say, the lifestyle I am living now, is this acceptable for me into the future? If it's not acceptable, if it feels tight, if it feels miserly, if it feels uncomfortable, FIRE probably isn't working for you, and you have to come up with another method. People who do FIRE are typically married or in a long-term relationship. It's expensive to be singles. When you're in a relationship, you get the benefit of sharing rent and expenses with another person, and also sharing the big goals like retirement across two individuals who are likely both working. But when you're single, you don't have that benefit. Everything is required of you. You have to pay all the rent. You have to pay for your own retirement. You have to save and invest for the future. Single people tend to do a lot of activities that are outside the home. Now, these are fun activities. It may be dating, it may be socializing with friends, but single people tend to do that a lot more outside the home than people who are married or in a long-term relationship. I do know some single FIRE people, but the majority of FIRE people I know are married and have been married for some time or in some form of a long-term relationship. They often tend to stay married too. FIRE doesn't work when you have to divorce someone and split up all your assets. FIRE can only work with two people in their situation working together towards the common goal of financial independence, retiring early. So FIRE people typically are aware of every single opportunity there is to make money, and they are optimizing everything. Meaning, even if they don't need to save in their 401k anymore, they're still saving to get that match. They're putting money away in their HSA account because they think it's a good deal. I have FIRE people who clip coupons religiously, even though they're already millionaires and really don't need to do it. They're often people who will go the extra mile to save money, or they'll go the extra mile to optimize whatever opportunity you put in front of them to get what they want. I have some FIRE adherents who travel well, but they travel on credit card points. And they've been able to have some pretty luxurious vacations and some pretty luxurious hotel stays simply based on credit card points and acquiring credit card points through a variety of different means. including being gifted points from their parents. So they're very creative in getting what they want. They work to save money. They'll go the extra mile to save some money. And those habits often stay with them after they have reached or largely reached their financial goal towards financial independence and retiring early. They typically make a decision to live in a lower cost area of the country. Now, I do know some FIRE adherents who live here in San Francisco, but it's extremely hard when you're paying $4,000 a month for an apartment. Most of my FIRE adherents live in another part of the country with a much lower cost of living. And they made a very deliberate and very conscious decision to do that. They would perhaps prefer to live in Los Angeles or New York City, but they realize in order to be financially independent and retire early, that's just not going to happen. So they settle for living in a Kansas or maybe in Arizona or a New Mexico. They're very conscious about state tax. I have some clients who live in Nevada simply because it's a better tax situation and that they don't pay a state income tax to Nevada as they would in California. So they're very deliberate in designing their lives and very cautious in designing their lives. And they realize that there are some sacrifices that they will need to make. And they, on some level, are okay with that if it gets them to their goal of financial independence and retiring early. Now, when I talk to my FIRE clients, something that I think people need to take into consideration with FIRE is it's a wonderful concept. I don't have a problem with the FIRE movement in a whole as a concept, as a financial advisor, but there are some caveats out there that I think people really need to consider if they're going down this pathway. They're often not spoken about in the FIRE community. You often have to do some research or talk directly to a financial professional who is very well aware of the FIRE movement and the pitfalls that could happen. But when someone tells me they're an adherent of the FIRE movement, I instantly think of several things. First things, the 4% rule. I think the 4% rule is seriously flawed when it comes to early retirement. If you're 65 or 75 and you're following 4%, for the most part, and I would talk to a financial professional about this because there are some individual factors that come into play. It's a completely different equation if someone is 35 and trying to retire and adhere to a 4% rule. Typically, the 4% rule doesn't work in a situation like that. If someone is 35 and retiring, it's more like a 2.5% rule, and that completely throws all of the tenets of FIRE out the window. Maybe someone can live on 4% of their investments, but when you peel it back to 2.5% of investments, it quickly unravels and the situation becomes unsustainable, or you have to peel back your lifestyle in such a way that you're not comfortable moving forward with retirement. So if you are an adherent of the FIRE movement or soon to be adherent of the FIRE movement, look more into the 4% rule. If you're planning to retire at 35, 45, 4% is way too much. Talk to a financial professional to find out what your exact number is, but just know that the 4% rule will not work for you long term. The second thing that I typically talk to adherents of FIRE about is inflation. And 2022 brought this into sharp focus where we had a spike in inflation. And for the first time in a very long time, we got a taste of what it's like to live in an inflationary environment and how quickly things change up in an inflationary environment. Personally, I don't think we're done with inflation. I think that very well we could see another round of inflation. But inflation really does a job on people's retirement. And if you were very young and retired, let's say you followed FIRE and you retired at 45, it really can put your financial portfolio in a vice that's really hard to get out of. And the unfortunate thing is you're not going to notice it probably until your 60s or maybe even 70s when it's too late for you to go back to work. But it's because inflation happened, especially early on in your retirement, and the investments couldn't keep up with the inflationary rate. And so your dollars are losing value relative to the cost of living, and eventually something's got to give with that. So I typically have a very detailed conversation with the individual or the couple about inflation and exactly what is their plan for inflation. Now, the good thing with FIRE, financial independence, retire early is kind of a misnomer. Most people don't plan to retire early. They're not going to sit home and watch The Price is Right. They typically are going to shift gears in their career and go and do some other form of work that may not be as prestigious or as high paid as their current position. And that's a different equation versus I'm not going to work anymore, or I'm just going to work at my leisure. I just wanted to throw that in because that is an important consideration. Most 35-year-olds are not going to sit home. Most 45-year-olds are not going to sit home if they retire early. They have some other plan. Social Security. I do have a conversation with the individual in the FIRE movement about Social Security. Pretty much if you're retiring at 35 or even 45, you're decimating your Social Security. You don't have 35 years of earnings in place. You have to make sure your retirement makes sense with little or no support from Social Security. Healthcare. We're now starting to see questions about the continuation of the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act is a video unto itself, was absolutely transformative for the American economy because it decoupled healthcare from the world of work. So it allowed people to leave the world of work, to start a business, to be an independent contractor, to try their hand at something else or retire early. And that is now coming into question what the future of the Affordable Care Act will be. If we eliminate the Affordable Care Act, it reattaches healthcare to the world of work. And what would that client who's retired at age 35 do for healthcare? They will likely have incredibly expensive premiums, or they're faced with the specter of taking a job just for healthcare. And I remember in the day and age before Obamacare, that was quite common where people took jobs only for the healthcare, worked only for the healthcare, and if you had a pre-existing condition, you were basically tied to a job until you were eligible for Medicare at age 65. The next thing I would ask is, what is Plan B? Like, what if your calculations are off? Or what if, a massive round of inflation comes through and your numbers just don't work anymore? If you retired at 35, really haven't done much of anything, and you need to go back to work at 45 or 50, it's going to be rough because you have a 10-year or 15-year lapse in your resume where you may not be able to very succinctly explain what you've been doing with this period of life. And so, like I said, most people in their 30s or 40s, when they're part of the financial independence retire early movement, they really don't want to retire. They really just want to shift gears into something else. But the question I would ask is, if you really needed to go back into your profession and earned approximately the same money, inflated for inflation, 15 years from now, would you be able to do that? Would you be able to do that? Some people can easily answer yes. If you're a teacher and your teaching license is kept active and you can go back into the classroom, that's one answer. But if you're a computer scientist or IT professional, you've been out of the world of work for 15 years. You're not going back to computer science, or you're not going back to IT at that point in the future because you are considered outmoded. What would you do in that situation? So, my thoughts as a financial advisor is FIRE is wonderful. I really like the movement. I like the movement's ideals and tenets. The reality is 90% of Americans really don't have the constellation of traits that I mentioned earlier to be able to successfully do FIRE. But if you can do FIRE even for 3 years, it can be absolutely transformative to your financial life. So what I typically recommend, especially for a very young person who is graduating college or graduating grad school and has some level of student loan debt, is that they become FIRE for maybe 3 years. And, they take that money that they're saving up and they use it to pay down their student loan debt. Maybe some of it they are investing, and then they reevaluate their life decisions in 3 years' time. Sometimes they find that for 3 years, this life has really worked for me. They weren't intending to live with roommates, but they found a really great roommate situation, and they don't mind it so much living with their roommates. So they're going to continue doing that. Sometimes people find it prohibitively difficult, and sometimes people don't make it through the 3 years to get to that point. But even if they were able to do it for a year, it put them in a much better financial position than if they weren't adhering to FIRE principles at all. So there you have it. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like, and tell me if you're an adherent of the FIRE movement. And if you found this information useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.